Hello, everyone. Welcome on into the first episode of season five for the LAS Lock-In podcast. It's me, KTL, with my good friend Stro02. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. Glad to get this back up and started for the season, and we got a lot to catch up on.
Yeah, catching up on end of season results for last season. We didn't have a podcast for it, but Mint won the Tier 2 Grand Showdown, and then Tempest won the Tier 1 Grand Tournament. So both were pretty good tournaments. I had a lot of fun as like the owner for it, just seeing the excitement from the players as well as like the growth from the league moving from last season to this season, which we'll go into a little bit. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the state of the league right now. What were your thoughts at the end of the season?
I think that it was really good. A lot of competitive matches. I mean, I don't think the T1 finals were is
Yeah, those
which are
unfortunately weren't very
closest.
close. Yeah.
But I think overall, I think the playoffs went really well, really smooth, and happy to see what we can get going this season.
Yeah, definitely would agree. For those of you who don't know, the play, our season started already. We have 18 or 17 tier 1 teams after removing of one, and then we have 14 tier 2 teams, so it's a pretty big growth from where we were last season, so pretty happy with that. And then we also started doing consistent two streams for every week, and we also are starting a community league, sort of like what a draft league is. So for those of you who haven't signed up, we encourage you to do so. It's gonna be played on Saturdays, so we'll be doing Saturdays into Sundays for LAS, and then we have our LAS queue that's running on Thursdays and Fridays, still to great success. So all of that's what's going on so far. We just want to take a quick minute to talk about what happened last season, working towards this season, and now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of things. So we'll start with the standings first, for how things look after 2 weeks already of a pretty short regular season. The regular season is, especially for Tier One, it's very short. It's only 5 weeks this year, because we just wanted to make it so where it's best of threes this season instead of best of ones. And then for Tier Two, it's 7 weeks for the regular season, so kind of what we used to do. It's also best of threes. So, but yeah, we'll go over it. These are what the standings look like so far. The standings for Tier 1 are as follows for Masters, Legends, and Champions. Stro, what were your early thoughts? Obviously, we did like our power rankings going into the draw show on what we thought teams would end up around. Are they similar to what your expectations were going into the season so far, or what would be the changes you've seen?
I would say most things line up pretty well. Tempest obviously a little like I expected to be kind of the top dogs. With the changes. I think Champions Division kind of lines up with I mean, I think I had Island Boys a little bit. I think they lost due to a ruling, but
Yeah,
um so if that ruling didn't go through, it'd line up pretty well with my expectations. Masters Division, not I'm pretty shocked by seeing Mint drop a game, but it was due to a sub. But other than that, everything pretty much lines up with what I expected. Just a few oddities that probably due to like a weird roster situation or such.
yeah. I think it's very cool to have very um stacked divisions as like they're really competitive. Where it felt like last season we had like one ultra competitive division and the other one wasn't so competitive. This time it feels like every division is actually pretty competitive. There's a solid like 3 to 4 teams in each division you think that could do pretty well the later we get into the year, which is great because tier one teams have 4 slots going to grand tournament. So having 4 teams from each division that could actually like be a threat is kind of cool. Not like, last season it was the 4 teams from Legends made the top four, right? For Grand Tournament. So it's nice to see that the legend or that all the divisions are very competitive. I think Masters has been the biggest surprise to me. Very competitive. Everyone's just taking games off each other. And then Ragnarok, who we're streaming this week, will play against Mint. So I think that's a really good um we can get a really good idea on the strength of Ragnarok and then the full strength of Mint with their starting intended roster. So I think it'll be really good to see. That gives us a kind of early look on what we think of the Masters division as far as like maybe Ragnarok running away with first place, or if it's going to be just super competitive down to the wire. As far as the Legends division goes, I think Smash has played the 2 worst teams so far, so kind of hard to have them to look at them. And when we talk about power rankings later, we'll talk about espionage, but it's hard when they played it against what is known to be the two worst teams in the division as their two wins. They have a pretty tough test against Tempest this year, or this time on Sunday, so it'll be interesting to see how those two teams play. And then I think Warriors has been very good, pretty good roster. Kakalin did a really good job of making a good roster that they're built to win. They're not built to be in the gauntlet like they have been in the past. So pretty cool to see. And this new Event Horizon team looks pretty good. And then moving over to champions, I think like Moist looks like the real deal. They've been just absolutely crushing everyone. Their stats, which was another thing we have for the first time this season, is like that we can actually track stats. Their stats are insane, honestly. Like their KDAs, their damage percentages, it's really crazy. Their jungler is a player to look out for. Currently has a 31 KDA right now, so pretty crazy through 4 games to have a 31 KDA. Elysium Nova had a really close series against TEG, which I feel like could have gone either way. So I have to see more of Nova when they play against Moist. And then Kamikaze, Island Boys, and TEG, even though TEG is 0-2, I feel like they should be lumped in that category of like the three teams that are playing for those two remaining spots in that division. I think B team, unfortunately, in their current condition, just doesn't look like they're going to be competitive at all. But I do think that the other three teams can be pretty competitive. But yeah, were there any teams that surprised you as far as like a decline or a uprise that maybe you weren't expecting when we looked at these rosters in the preseason?
Um, I definitely had high expectations for Warriors, but I didn't really expect them to. Usually, the Warriors struggle. Like they usually start pretty slow historically. So seeing them get off to a hot start is really nice to see. And I mean, I definitely expected them to be top three in their division. That's not the question. It was just like they started off hot, and let's see if they can keep it going.
Yeah, they played what was more than likely one of their hardest matchups week one, and they took the dub 2-1, and then they played against Glacial Golem with an E sub, and they won 2-1. Obviously because the E sub was hurting their bands quite a bit. But outside of that, I think they've been playing pretty well. I think my biggest surprise and decline is probably the Gods. I think they came in obviously like their roster that they wanted to come in with wasn't didn't
Yeah,
work out. Their player outranked, the requirements in the mid lane. So he was a pretty big force for what that team was going to be. So instead, they've kind of had to field a player who I'm pretty sure is off role in the mid lane. But I expected pretty high things from them. Unfortunately, not working their way so far, and they do have a pretty tough remaining schedule. They haven't played Warriors, and they haven't played Tempest, and I think they also haven't played or they did play Espionage. So they have a couple games that could be a little tough for them.
yeah, they're definitely gonna have to. This is the current state. They're just gonna have to take a few games off of. Gotta beat the lower end teams.
Yeah.
Um, But
Yeah.
I have faith in them, but they definitely, yeah, they're probably the team that I had high expectations for that isn't gonna be really meeting those so far.
Yeah, another team that I had really high expectations for was Mint, coming off of winning, the Tier 2 championship, looking really dominant. Their roster looked great. They struggled in week one against ABB. Credit ABB to playing really well, but also Mint had a sub support, which you already had spoken about. So we're gonna have to see their full strength now with their full roster, what happens and how they look, because they had a bye next or last week due to the RPG incident. So it'll be curious to see their strength. I think Masters looks really good. They all look really competitive, so it's great to see. And then it's really cool with the way we're doing our playoffs this season that all 6 teams make playoffs per division, and it'll just be so the regular seasons you can. I call it like a ramping arc, if you would, like in an anime where they're ramping towards playoffs. They're getting more cohesion with their teams. A lot of these teams are put together last minute, or maybe like a month before the tournament starts. These people maybe haven't played together with each other for a while, so they need that time to get better. So really interested to see. Obviously, the regular season matters as far as like your standing for playoffs because seeding does matter. It always does because if you're the 1 or 2 seed, you only have to play one best of five to get or one best of three to get to that double elimination part of the tournament. So very important to finish top two. And then for everyone else, they still make playoffs. They're just gonna have to play more matches, similar to that of like the LPL. So very excited to see where this all goes. But that's our looks right now. Current standings for Tier One. We're gonna move it over to Tier Two now and take a look at them. Okay, so the not so always spoken about Tier Two division. This is our gold like plat now because of the new rank update. But this is our Tier Two division. These are the teams in it. Stro, are the standings, same question, are the standings the same or similar to what you were expecting going into the season with our preseason rankings?
Um, I would say it's pretty accurate. Yeah, I mean, it's really cool to see the Monolith of Steel and Monolith of Slumber teams going 1-1 in their respective divisions. But yeah, everything else pretty much lines up. Um, and I think if there's any big ones, obviously Anguish has only played one series. That's who I kind of expect to be the top tier there. Um, Everything lines up pretty accurately.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that Slumber and Steel have, I thought they were going to be good, but they've surprised me how dominant they've been. I don't know if it's because of the strength of those divisions or of the teams that are below them, or if it's just super top heavy in Tier 2 this season. But a lot of competitive matches so far. There's not that many 0-2 teams or 0-1 teams, so you kind of like you like to see that teams are taking games off each other. It's not like just a clump of undefeated teams and a clump of 0-win teams. So it's nice to see people taking games off one another. I'm really interested to see when, like you said, Steel and Anguish play each other. It'll be on week 5 when that game is streamed, and of course, it'll be streamed live for us to see. The level of those two teams, I think in from staff had the idea that Anguish should be the best team in Tier 2, but these Monolith teams have done really well to like concrete themselves as really solid teams so far, only dropping a single map in two best of 3 situations. And then for Warriors, I think Tenebris looks really good. I think gonna have to see how they play against Rose this week. They play on Sunday streamed. I think it's a good test for Tenebris. Also for Rose to see what level they're in. And outside of that, I think it's pretty common. We expected these results. I think Wildlife is much better than their record. I think they had a pretty bad matchup against Anguish last week, but I expect them to still be ultra competitive in that division. And for tier two, it matters because regular season does matter because they have 7 teams, so only 6 make playoffs. So you don't want to be that bottom team who doesn't make playoffs. And for this season, the tier two teams make the grand tournament, which means that the top 2 teams in the end of playoffs will make the the grand tournament. So you want to have a good seed. You want to have the best situation to get to those top 2 spots to make it to the grand tournament with the big boys. But these are our standings for tier two. What we're going to do now is look at the power rankings. Our power rankings, we're going to throw a quick uh, precursor in there. They are ranked into groups like we did for the draw show. They're not put in any specific order or meant to be like a one through whatever. This is like how we feel the teams look from top to bottom. So we're going to go through and look at the tier one power rankings right now. So for tier one, Stro, these are our power rankings. What are any outliers that you think we want to talk about?
Yeah, so I know earlier we talked about the espionage. Um, we have espionage in the A tier. We think that they look good in their first 2 weeks of play, but they also have played against lower tier teams.
Yeah.
Um, so this is kind of like we see them as if they keep, if they can keep that level of play against those higher tier teams, that they'll stay here, possibly even move up to the S tier. So that's a team that could drop. I think there's a few teams in the B tier. Like I think the clumping of TEG, Island Boys, and Kamikaze. That's a pretty big clump there in one division. So I
Hmm.
feel like that's probably going to break up as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I think everything pretty much lines up. There's a few teams that can make a few jumps, maybe drop a little bit. I think there's a few. big matches coming up. I mean, like, right, this week is Tempest versus Espionage, so
Yes,
that
yeah.
will be
It's a
really
good
big,
yeah, it's a
and
good test for Espionage and for Tempest to see how their new rosters will play. Um, well, for Tempest, for Espionage, it's the same roster, but
yeah,
I think Espionage is a team we have our eyes on because they have played, according to our tier list, right? They've played against the two bottom teams from the division that are on C tier, right? So two of the worst teams in the entire league, or who they've played, according to these rankings and to how we've looked at them so far. So it'll be curious to see the level of espionage, how they handle against potentially a better opponent. And I think outside of that, I'm gonna try and have some hopium here for these bottom teams to switch it up. It's still pretty early in the season, so they have 3 more weeks to impress. I mean, hopefully when we come back to this in 2 weeks, we won't have to have a C tier at all, and we can just put them all on B tier. But we separated them just because we think there is that gap in between the B and the C tier teams. Um, I think as far as like the S tier teams, I think it feels like Moyes is probably the runaway team right now. And then we have Ragnarok, who has played a pretty good series. They played a pretty good series against Nitro, and then they had the bye last week against RPG. So curious to see the level of Ragnarok, especially this Sunday when they play against Mint. And then Nova is a team I have an S tier, but they're like barely an S tier because as you can see, they beat in
BTG,
they beat TG and they
and
beat Kamikaze. So both teams are in B tier, so similar to that of Espionage. They barely beat TEG. I mean, it was a 2-1 back and forward series, really close series. I think game three was a bit of a draft diffy as to why that game looked so ugly. But I do think they looked pretty shaky, especially for their first series. And TEG with a brand new roster put up a good fight. So I do think they'd probably be the outlier, which is interesting that because I rated them as so high as like top three in the entire tier for preseason. Warriors looked really good. I mean, they had a really close series against us. It was a really weird, or against my former team in Tempest. It was a really weird series because I felt like the game that they lost game one when I feel like they should have won, and then I feel like game two and three Tempest should have won, but Warriors won. So it was a really weird series. A lot of mishandling of picks and situations, but I do think they do look legit. I mean, they had another 2-1 series against Gollum, so I think they're going to be forever be a three-game series team, maybe. They do play against Event Horizon Series, who I do think is a pretty good team. They took Tempest to 3 games last week. They looked pretty good, so it'll be another good test for the Warriors. They kind of just got them all in a row. They played Tempest, now they play Cyrus, and then next week they play against Gods, who's even though Gods might not be at full strength, I feel like when you have those sister team matchups, there's always just that upper level of play that's going to come into it. Similar to that of like college football or regular football, where those rivalry games are just so important to both teams. So I think that'll be a great series also. Some of the teams that we haven't really spoken about yet is like Big Nitro. I think they've had a pretty good season so far. Looking to see how they play. They're playing against Apes, which I think is a pretty good team also. So there's a lot of like obviously through 2 weeks they've had a very short sample size, but in a 5 week season they just really need to get ramping right away and get some wins for some important standings. But yeah, these are our tier one power rankings. Let us know in the comments if you guys agree with it, if there's anything you guys would change. I think it's at a pretty good spot right now. But Stro, give me some hope here for these C tier teams. What are they looking to? Is it something that they can just improve on, or are they just kind of just stagnant here?
um, I think it comes down to you just gotta chip off, like, if they can start chipping off a few games in these series, just take one, and then when you play against the lower tier teams, so, like, when a team plays against EG, Island Boys, or Kamikaze, like, you have to take it to 3 games. Go for, like, the ugly wins at first, and once you get the confidence up, definitely start trying to give, like, a run to the top tier teams. If not, a run, just take 1 game off of them. Start just taking those games because those individual games do add up here and there, and they could help you in proceeding long run.
Yeah, of course. It kind of reminds me of B Team last season where they couldn't win a map the entire start of the season, and then they started just randomly getting a bunch of map wins. And that would help, especially even in best of threes. Like they've been 2-0 twice. They have played against Moist, which was like the toughest team to play week one, and then last week they played against Island Boys and got 2-0. They do play against TEG this week, so it's a pretty important matchup to see for that. As we said, that clump right now that's in because it feels like there's that those two teams up above, and then there's the clump with everyone else, and then we're not sure if B team really fits into that clump or not. So it's a pretty important series to prove that they belong to be in that clump of teams they're fighting for those two remaining spots. So they have their work cut out for them. I mean, they have a very tough schedule. They play against TEG and then they play against Nova. So they need to start picking at least one map up, I would say, in each of these series to continue to be competitive. And then for Glacial, I think Glacial has played against some pretty tough teams. They played against the two top teams in the division so far. They played Espionage and they played against Warriors. Obviously, we're not sure in the full strength of Espionage right now, but they took a game off of the Warriors, which even with an E-sub, I think that's still pretty impressive to do. So I am curious to see how Glacial does playing against their competitor who's also in the C tier in the Gods. I think that's a pretty those matchups, although they don't look very pretty because they're both 0-2, I think it could mean a lot for both of those teams. So I expect it to be a pretty competitive series. So maybe next time we see these two teams, there won't be this many teams in this bottom tier. But with that, we're going to move over to the tier two rankings. Again, precursor. This is not to be like, oh my God, why is this team put first and this team put third? They're just grouped together, and we just put them that way so everyone can see there's the clear divide between the groups. But let's move on over to that real quick. So for the power rankings for the S tier, we have the two monolith teams and we have Anguish. Do you think that they are just far and away the best team so far?
Um, so far they've looked the strongest. I think obviously English only has one game, but so far I think this lines up pretty well. I want to see Monolith versus English. I want to see that, and I want to see the other Monolith versus uh
Crusaders.
Neverith.
Yeah, Tenebris and Crusaders. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to see those games. I think right now from the first 2 weeks, which is obviously like limited sample size here, but I think they're the ones right now that, obviously they have the one seeds. Obviously you want to keep those one seeds, so you gotta keep, proving yourself against the other teams that you feel like are gonna make that drive up to the top.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool how I felt like last season in Tier 2 it was very top heavy. There was two really good teams. It was Rose and it was Mint, and there was a very, very, very big gap between them and everyone else. This season it feels a lot closer, even though we do have a couple dominant teams so far. I think the middle of the pack is very can very well put up fights against them. I think like Wildlife and Tenebros like being like A tier teams, I think they're very good and they could probably put up fights against most of those teams. Even some of the B tier teams like Rose, Magnum, and Star Surge Galaxy look pretty good. So really exciting tier two. I think tier two looks the most competitive it's looked in quite a couple years. So pretty excited to see how it's all going to run down for the race for playoffs, and then the race for top two if for the grand tournament. So those are our thoughts so far on everything LIS related. I mean, is there anything you wanted to bring up as far as put you on the mic here at the end, as far as moving forward for the next couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll give like the hopium to some teams. Don't worry about like, most of these teams, obviously tier two, you're kind of the exception because the seventh seed does not make the playoffs. But for everyone else, this is like, technically regular season doesn't matter and you could just scale the playoffs. That's fine.
Hmm.
But I believe for the rest of the regular season, a lot of these teams need to find their footing, kind of make this, set their standards of play for the season and continue to grow on that. So uh, if you guys are in a bad situation through 2 weeks, don't worry, you have some time to make it up. And tier two, I think this fight to not be seventh. This is going to be a very fun thing to watch.
Yeah, especially it's even like speaking for just tier one right now. I think you have 5 weeks of regular season, then you also have a bye week, which is pretty underrated to have that bye week before playoffs because again, like everyone makes playoffs, so you technically have 6 weeks to ramp to get ready for your if you're 4, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get ready for that first matchup, and that matchup's a must win. If not, you go to gauntlet, right? So like you have a lot of time to ramp. So even if your team's not looking that great right now, you have time. And for tier two, you have a 7 week regular season. You have a bye week. There's a lot of it within your schedule, right? So there's a lot of ways to just continually to try and improve. So definitely looking for people to improve and see the level of play consistently just keep rising as the season progresses is what we're really looking for. Final notes as far as like LAS related. Again, don't forget to sign up for the community league that is running on Saturdays. If you want to be part of LASQ and your captain hasn't sent it to you, create a ticket or send it to someone in manage and staff that make sure that if you want to be playing in this LASQ Champions Queue kind of format, you ask to get an invite to the server. It's only for players who are actually on teams in LAS. And then, the last thing is we posted the rule to make sure that people play solo queue this season. So just make sure you're working on that, getting those 25 games in before the end of the regular season. That is a requirement if you don't have those games and you can't play your playoff matches. So very important to get that all in. But with that, we appreciate everyone coming in and watching. It's a rather short episode, catching up only through 2 weeks, not really that much to go through right now. Really looking forward to those later episodes. We can start getting some guests and start talking about their season so far. But that's it from us guys who just sit on the bench and just watched everything. So thank you guys for watching, and we hope you guys have a great rest of the season.